And just want to say thank you as well for taking the time out of your busy schedule and spending some time with us so that we can share the lease sale process. Really wanting to emphasize how we're happy to have this dialogue and throughout, each step of the process. And Jeff Weichel is going to go through that into a lot more detail. All of these types of engagements of whatever level, as many and often you want. We can have those as we go through each of the different steps all the way through completion. We're not tied to any particular restrictions like a comment period with the public. We view these engagements as something very, very different and very important. So just want to emphasize that. And I think Rebecca is going to share the slides. So I'll wait for her to do that. All right, and as Hillary mentioned, my name is Megan Carr. I'm the Associate Director for the Office of Strategic Resources. And within my office, one of the components is the Marine Minerals Division, which oversees these processes that we're going to go over today. So next slide. It's always good to start with a mission statement that you see emphasizing that BOEM's responsibility is to manage the development of the U.S. federal seabed for energy, mineral, and geologic resources in an environmentally and economically responsible way. And a lot of that involves these types of engagements, a lot of really good conversations and dialogues, and getting your feedback to inform all of the types of decisions, and so that we can communicate whatever it is that we talk about in an appropriate way up to the decision makers and make sure that we're incorporating that feedback in a meaningful way. But what you see on the screen in the pink is highlighting the jurisdiction. Some of you may not have seen this type of a map before, but it's showing the extent of what we call the outer continental shelf, and with the number of different things that have changed over the last few years. Draw your attention to the bottom of the screen. It is quite a large area, nearly 3.2 billion acres. Pretty extensive for oversight, but we're going to be focusing on the area offshore of Virginia today and what that leasing process might look like. So next slide. And then the bigger thing that I think a lot of people have been paying attention to, last April, one of the executive orders that came out of the White House is the one that we've summarized on this slide, but the Unleashing America's Offshore Critical Minerals and Resources. The minerals in question that we're going to be talking about today are heavy mineral sands, and that's what you see on the image, just to kind of visualize what that looks like. And a lot of the piece for this particular executive order is to really focus and build domestic capabilities for these mineral resources, and really focused on making sure that we were taking an all of government approach in engaging as many different people, different groups, partners as we can, to really understand how we can go about the exploration, the characterization, the extraction, and the processing of these materials in the best way possible, while still meeting a lot of the nation's energy and security needs. A lot of this was also to move forward and to support science as much as possible. And that leads into really good maps and technology investment that can be coordinated to make sure that we're making the appropriate decisions, and that should these activities go forward, they're being done in as minimally impactful way as possible. And mentioned before that strengthening the internal coordination that's across government, but also between BOEM and the different tribal communities and tribes themselves. So next slide. And I will pass it over now to Jeff Weichel. He is leading our Marine Minerals Division, and I'll let him introduce himself and go from there. Thank you again.
Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate your time and attention to this topic. And thank you so much for being here. My name is Jeff Weichel. I'm calling in from the state of Virginia. I work and live near Leesburg, Virginia. I have been at BOEM for about 20 years. I'm a geological oceanographer by training. In my graduate studies, I actually did a lot of work off the eastern shore of Virginia, looking at the geologic framework, and I have been blessed to spend a fair amount of time on the water there, and in some of the really pristine barrier islands that can be found along the Virginia coast. Again, I consider myself really lucky to have had that life experience. So I want to start with a broader conversation about what critical minerals are. For the last 50 years, this has been quite a fascinating topic. Dating back to the mid 70s, there has been a global conversation about growing demand for critical minerals and how the global supply chain will meet that growing demand. Critical minerals, as our society increasingly invests in technology, has all sorts of applications from defense to aerospace to biomedical to electronics. It's found in the manufacturing sector, in energy sector, in a lot of regular day household items and electronics that we use from our cell phone to our iPads. Um, for some of these minerals, the supply chain is quite unpredictable, largely invested in some terrestrial mines in just a few countries around the world. And so there are a lot of countries, including the US, that are looking to stabilize the supply chain and looking at resources within their own country, whether that be on land or newly in the marine environment. Every 3 years, the US government prepares a list of critical minerals that are essential to the US economy and national security. The most recent list was published in November of 2025. There are now 60 minerals on that list, starting with A for aluminum and ending with Z for zirconium. And there's a lot of elements in between. There are a number of principal marine mineral deposit types that we're going to talk about today. We're going to focus in on heavy mineral sands, but there are polymetallic nodules, two types of crusts, a sulfide crust and a ferromanganese crust, phosphorites, and there can even be deep sea muds that are critical mineral bearing. Next slide, please. As we're transitioning slides, I would like to acknowledge that this is a technical topic in nature. And so if there are any questions along the way, it's a small audience. I invite you to interrupt me and chime in. You can use the chat or raise your hand and speak up or just chime in. That kind of participation is certainly welcome. I want to discuss where are critical minerals found in terms of the marine environment, and I noted these five principal deposit types earlier. I like to differentiate between deep sea mining and really what we're talking about today. There are three principal deposit types that are found in the deep ocean, and by the deep ocean, I'm talking, hundreds of meters to almost 7,000 meters, and those being polymetallic nodules that are fist size, but are very rich in critical minerals that are often used in batteries. There's ferromanganese crusts that tend to be more spread across the seafloor. Those also are rich in materials that are used in batteries and other technologies, including rare earth elements. There's polymetallic sulfides that are associated with ocean spreading centers, tend to be in more deeper water, at least in the US marine environment. The sulfide deposits that are targeted there are not active spreading centers, but generally speaking, those that are no longer active. Again, we are shifting your attention today to heavy mineral sands for the most part, but there are two deposit types that occur in the shallow shelf environment, and those being heavy mineral sands, also called placer deposits. I will say heavy mineral sands are the only mineral deposit type here that is actively being dredged anywhere in the U.S. So if you've watched on TV the gold mining shows offshore Alaska, in state waters, there is a long-standing placer dredging, a small-scale dredging industry there. And then technically on the Atlantic coast and East Coast, these types of sands are also dredged and used in coastal restoration projects, but there is no commercial application for the dredging of sand in the Atlantic and Gulf, just the one commercial application of placer deposits offshore Alaska. And again, right now that's limited to state waters. I will note that these deposit types host critical minerals, but also strategic minerals. And the difference there are critical minerals are those that are identified by the federal government as being in unique supply situations and unique demand situations, but there are also strategic minerals that can be found in some of these deposits. For example, gold. Gold is not a critical mineral, but it is a strategic mineral, and it's one of the minerals that has been targeted off of Alaska. If you don't mind, we could jump to the next slide unless there are a couple questions. So our team here at BOEM has some unique functions around these areas. For a number of years, I would say upwards of 40 years, we have been doing resource evaluation research and environmental research around the topic of marine minerals. That includes critical minerals, strategic minerals, sand and gravel that's used in beach nourishment and coastal restoration projects along the Atlantic seaboard and the Gulf Coast. In the last decade, we have really been focusing on two major um, inventory concepts. One is our National Offshore Sand Inventory, focusing on sand and gravel, and the other being our National Offshore Critical Mineral Inventory. We are building up our knowledge and understanding of the mineral deposit types that I previously identified. Heretofore, our leasing function, which we're going to get in today, has focused more or less on non-competitive sand and gravel for coastal restoration projects, again, in the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. We have not issued a commercial lease for any kind of commercial marine mineral in decades. In fact, the only time in the history of our organization that we have done so was in the 1960s for a phosphorite deposit offshore the coast of California, but that never moved forward. Ultimately, these minerals are really important, again, for the supply of our domestic sourcing, for security, national security, defense, manufacturing, all sorts of applications in our economy. Even if you take away the critical mineral component that is in some of these deposit types, the residual minerals have a significant value to coastal restoration and coastal infrastructure protection. Next slide, please. Again, I want to emphasize we're going to be talking about commercial leasing from this point forward. There are no commercial leases on the OCS at this time. There was a handful only ever issued in the early 1960s, and they were relinquished without any development. The last expression of interest was in the early 90s and mid 90s. There was some interest for a gold sale offshore Alaska, and then there was some interest in the mid 90s offshore New Jersey for aggregate. So not looking at critical minerals, but looking at sand and gravel for use in making concrete, building roads, building buildings, those sorts of things. But again, neither one of those moved forward. We have a three-part regulatory framework that's developed around commercial access to marine minerals writ large, but this is what would apply for access to critical minerals. Today, we're largely going to be focusing on the centerpiece here, which is leasing. You'll note that there's a dividing line between what we call prospecting, which is going to search for minerals. Where do they exist? You can do that on a scientific basis or on a commercial basis. But when you do that and make that investment, the prospecting, if you did it from a commercial vantage, you do not gain any kind of mineral rights to then pursue that. You have no advantage against your competition. In the leasing process, which generally takes about a year, is a competitive process where anyone interested in leasing has to compete. Leasing gives you limited rights. There is a subsequent process of operations where you may delineate the resource. That means you're exploring for it further, mapping it further. You may test how you access or recover minerals found in that resource. And then there's the mining phase, which is the production phase, the development phase, where you actually begin to move the critical minerals located in marine deposits for commercial gain. Um, we are exploring the leasing process now, and even if you lease, it doesn't mean you get to necessarily the commercial operations. It is possible. It's possible that you can start the leasing process and not even issue a lease. In fact, that's what happened in the mid-90s. We started that process and it never came through to fruition. Again, that process, generally speaking, takes somewhere between a year and 2 years. Next slide, please. So honing in on that centerpiece of leasing, there are multiple steps. This infographic lays out those steps. And we are about ready to basically launch at the beginning of this step 2 here that's marked on this timeline reading from left to right. So in December, we received an unsolicited request from a company called Odyssey Marine. They're based in Florida and incorporated in Nevada. They are a company that has global interests that range from the Cook Islands in the Pacific to some work off of Mexico associated with phosphates and some growing interests in the U.S. OCS. They submitted unsolicited lease request. We reviewed that request and we responded, not approving anything, but just indicating that we would get this other 2 through 9 steps. And the first step is a request for interest and information. And that's where we go out to tribes, to possible other parties that are interested in industry, federal, state, local governments, commercial fisheries, recreational fishers, you name it. There's an opportunity for them to provide input to see if we move to step 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. I wanted to remark this is a competitive process that involves auctions, bidding, payments to the government. Steps 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There is a review process where the government does some technical and/or environmental review. I would call out step 4, which is basically our NEPA process. Associated with that NEPA process, we do interagency consultation with other federal agencies, state agencies. We consult with state historic preservation officers, tribal preservation officers pursuant to Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. All along this process, we are also engaged in hopefully a respectful and productive manner with Atlantic tribes who are interested in consulting. We have yet to embark on step 2, so hopefully you can see that we're starting early. And our intention during this process is to engage in a sincere and honest way along the way. Next slide, please. If a lease is issued, it gives lessees the right to submit plans to do more. There are 3 types of plans. Delineation plan, that's where you go explore for the minerals, characterize them to a greater degree of confidence such that you have a good strategy going into a testing plan or a mining plan. A testing plan is if you're doing feasibility studies, you have to pilot test processing techniques, mining equipment. And then a mining plan is a plan that's submitted if you go to sort of fuller scale commercial operations. These three plans can be combined, but there is unique and distinct and separate environmental review and technical review at each one of these phases if the process gets to that phase. The only thing that a lessee can do if a lease is issued is conduct what are called preliminary activities. And they're a set of basically geophysical and geological mapping. You can do some environmental characterization on your lease. The trick is, or I guess not the trick, but the standard or the threshold is that those activities cannot have significant environmental effects. But if a lessee is issued a lease, there is a right to conduct these preliminary activities to understand further understand your leasehold. Next slide. And so we're going to be focusing in a little bit about these preliminary activities and what they look like. So the area of interest, and this is a very rudimentary picture of the area of interest, but it's on the intercontinental shelf offshore Virginia, south of the Maryland-Virginia state line, and generally speaking, north of the Chesapeake Bay mouth. It is seaward of the pristine Virginia Barrier Islands and landward of the shelf break canyon heads that can be found in this part of the East Coast. As mentioned in the opening remarks, Odyssey Marine submitted an unsolicited lease sale request in November. We reviewed that request, and in December, we announced that we were initiating the process to explore the potential for leasing here. I will say that there has been a long history of investigation of sand and heavy mineral sands in this region. And so we know that the region is prospective for these deposit types and their constituent minerals. We will be happy to share information to our press release. I will note that the request for information and interest that is forthcoming soon, Hillary mentioned it in her opening remarks, it will have more detailed maps, and our BOEM.gov website will be updated with that information, including maps, GIS data, other resources that may be of interest to tribes. I will note that the company that has submitted the unsolicited lease sale request is again Odyssey Marine. You can find out information at odysseymarine.com. They are a publicly traded company, and they have some information about their business interests here. But I will remind you that this is a competitive process. The point of the RFI is to find out if there is additional industry interest. Even if there is, that does not predetermine that there will be leasing and future activities under this lease, under such a lease if one is issued. Next slide, please. I wanted to sort of zoom out and give a little bit of specific context of heavy mineral sands along the Atlantic seaboard. They're pervasive both onshore in the coastal plain, as well as along the intercontinental shelf from central Florida north into New England. The red oval on the sort of the coastal plain map to the left, and the red oval to the shelf map, the black and white map on the right, identifies that rough area of interest. Along the coastal plain, there has been historical mining from Florida into Virginia. There is a active heavy mineral sands mine near Stony Creek, Virginia, that's active today. About 10 years ago, there were two others down in Dinwiddie County and Greensville County, for those who know where those locations are. The perspective that we're sharing here is just the wide occurrence of these features. And the commonality is they start with minerals that occur in mountains and over time are subject to severe weathering and erosion. They're transported through tributaries and bays out into the ocean environment, where they're reworked. Over geologic history, this can happen for over a long periods of time. The terrestrial mines, for example, that are currently being mined in Virginia are coastal deposits, rework deposits of sand that were formed during different stages of sea level rise 3 to 4 million years ago, but they're very similar in formation and processes and concentrations compared to what you find in the ocean environment. And so heavy mineral sands are found with sand and then unique mineral types that are denser than those sand. So sand has a certain specific gravity or heaviness or denseness, and those are quartz grains. And then there are a number of minerals that are heavier than that have a specific gravity that is 2, 3, 4 times as heavy as those quartz grains that we commonly think of at the beach, like the light ones that are shown in the picture here. And so when you think about the darker grains that are shown in that beach lamination to the bottom lower left there, those are the things, because they're heavier, they concentrate under the forcing of waves, um, currents, wind forces, and they concentrate naturally. But because they're heavier, they're also quite easy to separate in a mechanical process. What makes these deposits really interesting is the uniqueness of the minerals that are in them. You only need 2 or 3% of a weight by volume to potentially make this economic. So most of the material is sand. There are places in the Atlantic where you can get 10, 15% weight by volume for these denser heavy minerals like ilmenite, um, leucozine, rutile, zircon, monazite, but the most of it is your traditional quartz sand. And again, the threshold, depending upon the market, only requires 2 to 3% of the material in a given location to be critical minerals. Next slide. To orient you to the map, the red oval again is the starting point area for possible leasing offshore Virginia. You can see Florida to the south and uh, Cape Cod and Massachusetts at the northern limits. I just wanted to point out that this mining location is not necessarily in a geographic unique area, but it is in an area that's unique relative to leasing. From Long Island south to Cape Hatteras, and then from Cape Hatteras south to Key West. Those are sort of geologic provinces that have similar um, uh, types of heavy mineral sands and have similar provenance or origin. In that swath, only the Mid-Atlantic is eligible for leasing right now, from the Virginia, North Carolina border south, wrapping around into the Gulf around Florida. That area is ineligible for leasing under presidential memorandum. Leasing is not possible in those areas through 2032. There are heavy mineral sands found north of Long Island, but their distribution is relatively unique relative to what you find in the Mid-Atlantic, just because, at least in the shallow inner shelf, it's significantly influenced by recent glacial history. I will say that for upwards of the last 40 or so years, BOEM has made a significant investment with partnerships in with USGS, state geologic surveys, to map at a sort of a course level the existence of these kind of deposits. I noticed that there were a number of tribes from the Northeast who express interest in this topic. And we are happy to direct you to some of the information that we've done with the state geological surveys in the New England region, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, etc. I will note that there is no indication of commercial interest in those areas, and the RFI is limited to the Virginia Shelf. Next slide, please. I just want to really hone in on the formation process of heavy mineral sands. This talks about phosphorites and heavy mineral sands, but phosphorites do exist in the deeper part of the area of interest for leasing. We are not sure how much commercial interest is really there for those things. So I will focus on the heavy mineral sands just to indicate that heavy mineral sands are constantly being formed, sorted, transported, concentrated. They're happening as we speak along the Virginia coast, wherever there's waves, currents, wind interacting with these sediments. Over time, as sea level rises, these deposits get concentrated, and they are variable in their concentration. Along the Virginia Shelf, you can find heavy mineral sands in two subtypes of geologic deposits, something called like a sand ridge or a sand body. That's a positive relief feature. Those are typically targeted for your borrow sources for coastal restoration projects or coastal protection projects, but you can also find them in bed sheets where the sand body is thinner and doesn't really have positive relief. But I want to make the point along the Virginia Inner Shelf, it's not a monolith in terms of the geomorphology and the habitat types. You can have mud next to sand. So in these large areas, part of the task would be to find the more optimal sand bodies where these heavy mineral sands are most concentrated. Next slide, please. In terms of the exact um, critical minerals that are being searched for in these heavy mineral sands, um, some of the principal ones are titanium, zirconium, and some of the rare earth elements. Again, in a situation where by weight by volume, you can only have a small percentage of the overall volume that you move. The titanium product can be very important as an opacifier. A popular use for titanium is in paints, in plastics. Zirconium can be used in telecommunications and defense applications, can be used in creating metal alloys. There is a broader list of rare earth elements, all of which are difficult to pronounce, but there are some rare ones that can be found in these deposits that are of principal interest. Both in heavy mineral sands and in phosphorites, you can also find phosphate, which has a popular application in fertilizer. Part of the challenge to industry to make this economic is the question of what you do with the sand itself. They're principally seeking to extract and separate the heavy minerals, those denser minerals that have a higher specific gravity than sand. Um, and so there is a downstream application with the significant volume of end product, which is sand. That could have applications in beach restoration projects, in construction aggregate, in road building, and industry will have the task of figuring out if that is a saleable commodity or that's something that could potentially be a sort of a benefit stream that is an end product of this processing of heavy mineral sands. Next slide, please. So I early on, I indicated that we would be talking about the types of activities that would be possible under a lease if a lease is issued. If we get through that year and a half process, those 9 steps that were articulated, what would industry potentially be able to do within the boundaries of the leasehold if a lease was issued. And those activities are largely geophysical surveys, very similar to what was conducted for wind activities. We do not believe, though, that some of the more powerful energy sources would be used, like air guns um, or sparkers, if that rings a bell for anyone. These are generally high resolution sources because they only need to map the near surface sediment. The data that they would collect is useful not only to characterizing and locating the mineral resources, but looking at habitat, the potential for historic properties, ancient submerged landforms that may be in the region. Geophysical data is generally a precursor for geologic sampling. We would expect the principal sampling to be vibrocoring. Again, these activities can't have significant effects. If there are any activities that would have significant effects, that automatically triggers submission of what was called the delineation plan, and there's more technical and environmental review as part of that process. There's probably a subset of environmental characterization activities that could occur as a preliminary mapping activity. That could be as you collect bottom samples, you could be looking at benthic communities. Again, those activities cannot lead to significant effects. Under no scenario could they be dredging the seafloor as a preliminary mapping activity. Those activities are reserved under the mining plan or in a limited scenario under the testing plan, and that requires the submission of a plan, technical review, environmental review of that plan, reconsultation, and we assume tribal consultation. Next slide, please. Um, in context of what I said, that extraction or recovery could not happen, we would be remiss not to discuss the downstream possibilities that could eventually happen if a bunch of dominoes were to fall. These again would be contingent on a plan submission, much like a construction and operations plan in renewable energy, additional regulatory review from multiple agencies, not just BOEM. All of this would involve additional environmental review and consultation with resource agencies, state agencies, and tribal nations. We think, based upon the mineral resources that we understand and our initial conception of industry interest, that the extraction operations would not be very different from the dredging that is currently used along the Atlantic seaboard for navigation or beach nourishment projects. The graphic on the right shows a modern-day hopper dredge that is regularly used in the Mid-Atlantic. The image to the top is a cutaway of a hopper dredge. And the hopper dredge basically has a drag arm that is generally about 4 to 6 feet wide, depending on the size of. Sometimes it can be a little bit bigger, but depending on the size of the hopper dredge, that makes contact with the seafloor. And essentially, it functions like a vacuum, and it creates pressure that lifts the sediment in thin cuts up into the hull where it's stored. That then, when the hull gets filled with sediment, sand, the drag arms are lifted, they come off of the seafloor, and the hopper dredge then transports to where that full load will be unloaded. We are starting with a very, very large footprint um, to explore where there could be interest. I want to talk briefly about the scale that's likely to happen if this does move forward. There is a lease. There are plans submitted, and those things moved forward and were approved. And that's a giant if. So this is a future scenario, multiple years down the line. I don't want to speculate how long, but more than a couple. Um, the reality is whatever activity, dredging activity occurs is limited by domestic onshore processing. And so we believe at this time, if this industry were to get started, um, the amount of annualized footprint and volume that could be moved would be on par with an individual beach nourishment project. So you may know on the Atlantic seaboard in any given year, there's probably 10 to 15, maybe a little bit more of those projects occurring, maybe 10 to 15 navigation projects. So we'll be adding one to that context. They would probably be focusing in shallow water, closer to the 10 to 20 to 30-meter water depth as compared to the water depth of the overall RFI area. There would only be one to two of these vessels operating in that footprint, that smaller footprint, that would probably be within a lease block, if not two lease blocks, only for a part of the year. It's important to note that hopper dredging does involve some overflow of water discharge back into the ocean, but generally speaking, it doesn't involve tailings. At this point, industry is not proposing at-sea processing. Essentially, they would fill up the hopper plant, that vessel, they would take it onshore where it would be pumped out of the hull. The separation would go through multiple phases, but it would happen on land. The first phase of separation is called a gravity separation. And because of the different density, the heaviness of each mineral type, they can send it through a spiral. There is an example of a small scale spiral to the right. There is a facility in Virginia that's set up to do this, that small scale. It can only take a certain amount of throughput to be able to process this. And that's a significant constraint on how much activity could occur in a given year. There are some other downstream processes. Some of the heavy minerals that are included in these deposit types are also magnetic. So after you go through a gravity process, you can also send it through a mechanical magnetic process where some of the magnetic minerals can be separated in that way. But again, I want to stress that the end product, the beginning product and the end product is a lot of sand, not these heavy minerals that are also part of the heavy mineral sand deposit type. Next slide. So I wanted to end looking forward before we get into our open Q&A, which I'm hopeful will lead to a great conversation. But BOEM is planning to publish its RFI soon. We don't have an absolute date. We're hoping on the order of weeks to months. As that unfolds, we will be reaching out to Atlantic tribes for additional engagement in this process, including invitations for consultation. Again, the infographics at the bottom are to reinforce the point that initial consultation will be focused on principally the initial activities that could happen under a lease and not necessarily the downstream things that could happen if a lease is issued, plans are submitted, and operations are proposed at a commercial scale. So that was, I think, the conclusion of our prepared presentation. Hillary and Megan, I invite you to transition us to the Q&A.